Good afternoon, students. Today we'll have a lecture on food poisoning definition. So, food poisoning is acute gastroenteritis caused by ingestion of food or drink contaminated with either living organism, for example, salmonella, or toxins like Clostridia or staphylococcal, or you can say Bacillus cereus. Or chemical substances, they could be arsenic or pesticides, or toxins derived from plants and animals like shellfish, fungus, and you can say uh, by potato which contains excess of solanine. So this is how you define a food poisoning. That is acute gastroenteritis which could be caused by ingestion of food or drinking contaminated uh, a drink which has these substances. Okay, so this is how you define food poisoning. Now, the difference between food poisoning and acute gastroenteritis. There are 2 points by which you can differentiate a food poisoning and acute gastroenteritis. Okay, the first important one is in food poisoning, the causative organism or the toxin will need food as a medium for its generation and transmission. And it's not just caused by simply drinking water contaminated with an infected organism. Okay. And the second important point in food poisoning is that it can present as an outbreak.
Causes poor personal hygiene, bad food storage, dirty kitchen, having food after its expiry date is over, and no pest control.
Now, the next important thing is the types of food poisoning. Now, the important types of food poisoning, mainly you can classify food poisoning into non-bacterial and bacterial. Okay. Now, examples in non-bacterial are, it's caused by chemicals such as we've already discussed in the definition, like arsenic, certain plants, seafoods, and in bacterial you can say that is caused by ingestion of food contaminated by living bacteria or the toxins. Now moving on, we have certain important types of food poisoning which we can discuss, like the salmonella food poisoning, the staphylococcal food poisoning, botulism, and the Clostridium perfringens food poisoning. Then we have the Bacillus cereus food poisoning. So we'll just discuss all these, some important points about these food poisonings, and then we can see the like in case there is any outbreak, how do we investigate these food poisoning. Now the first one is the salmonella food poisoning. So this is a very common, the most common form of food poisoning, and there are few reasons why this food poisoning is at an increase in these years. So what are these? That is, there is more of community feeding or having food outside. So all this has increased in the present days. Okay. Then the international trade in human food also has increased. So a lot of foods which were available in some other countries, so we can easily get it here, or we the food that is here that can be sent there. So all this has increased, and by this sometimes there could be contamination of the food. Then the next important point is there is higher incidence of salmonellosis in farm animals. So if they have, so that could be again transferred to by ingestion of such food items. So this is another one important reason. Then widespread use of household detergents interfering with sewage treatment. So this is another important aspect. And then we have wide distribution of prepared foods. So these are few reasons why the salmonella food poisoning is increasing. Now we'll see some important epidemiological factors of Salmonella food poisoning. Now we'll see the epidemiological factors of Salmonella food poisoning. So we can uh, study the epidemiology by these under various headings like the agent factors, source, incubation period and mechanism of food poisoning. Let's see them one by one. So agent factors, uh, the most common species which affects the humans or which can cause human outbreaks are Salmonella typhimurium, Salmonella cholera suis and Salmonella enteritidis. Okay, so these are the ones which affects humans most commonly. Then source. It is primarily a disease of animals and man can get this infection by farm animals and poultry. Okay, humans can get it by having contaminated meat, milk and milk products, sausages, custards, egg and egg products. Then another important thing is rats and mice. Uh, they can be a source. They are often heavily infected and they can contaminate these foodstuffs by their urine and feces. And another important contribution is by the temporary human carriers. So we have seen agents, that is the most common species we have already discussed. Then source, that is by uh, ingestion of any of the products what I have just mentioned. The next important point is the incubation period. Now incubation period is from 12 to 24 hours. Then the mechanism of action. The causative organism on ingestion will multiply in the intestine and give rise to acute enteritis and colitis. Okay. So this is how once it is ingested, then it multiplies and it can cause infection of the gut, that is acute enteritis and then colitis. Okay. The onset is generally usually they present with chills, fever, nausea, vomiting and profuse watery diarrhea which is usually for 2 to 3 days. And again another important thing is the mortality is very less, that is 1%, and a convalescent carrier state can last for several weeks. Okay. Staphylococcal food poisoning. Now this epidemiology we are going to see under these similar headings like agent, source, incubation period and mechanism of food poisoning. So it's as common as the Salmonella food poisoning which we just discussed. Now coming to the agent, enterotoxins of certain strains of Coagulase positive, that is the Staphylococcus aureus, can is an important agent for the staphylococcal food poisoning. Now, at least 5 different enterotoxins have been identified. And the other important factor about this staphylococcal food poisoning is the toxins which are formed. Okay, they can be formed at a optimum temperature of 35 degrees Celsius to 37 degrees Celsius, and these toxins are relatively heat stable and they are resistant to boiling for 30 minutes or more. So you can see that uh, this is usually the agent which will cause the staphylococcal food poisoning. Now moving on to the source. Staphylococcus, they are usually found on skin, in the nose, throat of men and animals, and it's a common agent for boils and these infections which present as fevers in humans or animal. Okay. So you can see that if a cow is affected by this infection, it will usually have mastitis and it's responsible for food poisoning because of ingestion of milk and milk products. Okay. Then the other important thing is that any food which has salads, custards, milk and milk products, it could be contaminated by this staphylococci and this could cause staphylococcal food poisoning. So we have seen the source. Usually staphylococci are present on the skin and nose, throat of men and animals. and they present with this infection can even present with boils and uh, fever in human and animals. So very important point is in cows it can cause mastitis, and then ingestion of these milk and milk products can lead to infection. Now moving on to the incubation period, which is 1 to 8 hours, and the reason why this incubation period is short is because the infection is caused by uh, preformed toxins. So it could cause an infection very soon. Then mechanism of food poisoning. So what exactly happens is this staphylococcus food poisoning can happen when we ingest or when we have the toxins which are preformed in the food. Okay, uh, and sometimes the bacteria have grown intradietic toxins also. So this is one important factor. Then again, we have already discussed that this toxin is a heat resistant toxin, and it can remain in food after the organisms have even died. If the uh, this agent, or you can say the staphylococcus organism is not there, even then if the toxin is there, because it is a heat resistant toxin, so if it's there, even then we can have infection. The toxin acts directly on the intestine and CNS, and usually the illness can manifest as sudden onset of vomiting, abdominal cramps and diarrhea. And sometimes in severe cases, they could be blood and mucus in the stools. And another important point is uh, that very mortality is very less in the staphylococcal food poisoning. Okay, and in staphylococcal food poisoning, it's usually that fever is quite rare compared to the salmonella food poisoning. Botulism. Now again, we can classify the epidemiology under agent, incubation period, and the source and mechanism of action. So we'll again see all of these one by one. So it's a serious infection, but it's very rare, and mortality is quite high compared to the other diseases what we just discussed, that is the salmonella and the staphylococcus. Comparatively, the mortality is higher in botulism, that is almost two-thirds of the victims uh, usually don't survive when they are affected by botulism. Now moving to the agent factors. Uh, in the agent factor, the important points that you need to know is it's usually the exotoxin of Clostridium botulism, and the usual types are type A, B and E. Now moving on to the source. The organism is widely distributed in soil, dust, intestinal tract of animals, and it usually enters the food as spores. So this is an important point. Then the food most frequently responsible for botulism are home preserved foods such as home canned vegetables. Then we have smoked or pickled fish. Then homemade cheese. Then such similar food items can lead to botulism, ingestion of these foods. Okay, and the name as such, botulism, is derived from a Latin word for sausage. Okay, the sausages that are prepared, so they are known as botulus in Latin. Okay, then the next important point is the incubation period, which varies from 18 to 36 hours. Mechanism of food poisoning. So, in botulism, the toxin that is produced, the toxin which is causing food poisoning, it's a preformed toxin, that is intradietic toxin that is present in the food under certain suitable
anaerobic conditions. And this toxin mainly affects the parasympathetic nervous system. So in botulism, usually what is different is that the gastrointestinal symptoms which are seen are very rare compared to the other food poisonings that we have seen. The prominent symptoms are dysphagia, diplopia, ptosis, dysarthria, blurring of vision, muscle weaknesses, and sometimes even quadriplegia. Fever in botulism is usually absent and consciousness is retained. The disease is usually fatal and death can occur within 4 to 8 days. It could be due to respiratory or cardiac failure. And those patients which recover, they do not develop antitoxins. So this point you need to remember that even after recovery, the person will not have antitoxin in his blood. And another important point is that this toxin which is there, it is a thermolabile toxin. That is, if the food is heated before having and heated up to 100 degrees Celsius for few minutes, then the food that is there, it is safe for consumption. Botulism can affect infants, and the botulism which occurs in infants is known as infant botulism. It is a in this infection, it's usually that Clostridium botulinum is present in the gut, and after that there is production of toxin. Then the other important points regarding prophylaxis is that prophylaxis could be done by an antitoxin, and it could be given to all the individuals who have, if in case there is a case of botulism, so other people who have had the food, they could be given prophylaxis. And prophylaxis can be done by giving the antitoxin, that is and the dose varies from 50,000 to 1 lakh units, and it's given IV. Then a few other points of importance here are that if this antitoxin is given after the toxin is fixed to the nervous tissue, then it is of very less use. Another important drug, that is guanidine hydrochloride, can be given orally in doses of 15 to 40 milligrams per kg of body weight, and this can reverse the neuromuscular block of botulism. um, Together, having good medical and nursing care and giving this drug, that is guanidine hydrochloride, it's a very it would be very useful in the treatment of botulism. And another important point is active immunization with botulinum toxide is also present, and it could prevent botulism. Clostridium perfringens. So in Clostridium perfringens food poisoning, we'll again discuss the same points, that are agent, source, incubation period, and mechanism of food poisoning, and then the clinical features. Now taking all these points one by one, the agent is Clostridium perfringens, and the source is that this organism is usually found in feces of humans and animals. It's found in soil, water, and air. And in most of the cases, what history we see is that uh, there was history of ingestion of meat dishes, and poultry, and usually they say that the food was prepared before 24 hours before the consumption. There was a gap of 24 hours, and then it was allowed to cool slowly at room temperature and then heated just before having the food. Okay, so this is how the source is. Now moving to the incubation period, which ranges from 6 to 24 hours. Usual peak is from 10 to 14 hours. Then the mechanism of food poisoning. What usually happens is that these spores are able to survive the usual cooking practices. And after cooking, if this cooked meat and poultry, they are not cooled enough, then the spores which are there, they will germinate, and usually these organisms will multiply between 30 degrees to 50 degrees. and then they can produce a different variety of toxins like the alpha toxin and the theta toxin. So a very important point here, when we know how these organisms can, at what temperature the spores are there, then how they germinate. So by this we will if we practice certain practices, like if we cook food just before consumption, or if we need to store it, then it has to be rapidly and adequately cooled. So this can prevent these spores to germinate and then produce these toxins which we just spoke of. Moving to the clinical symptoms. The most common symptoms here are diarrhea, abdominal cramps, and sometimes very mild fever. And then another, and most of these symptoms, they are just after 8 to 24 hours after having these food. And the other symptoms like nausea and vomiting, which will be very less. And illnesses are usually of short duration, that is just one day. And here recovery is rapid. Usually mortality is very less, or you can say there is no mortality. Bacillus cereus food poisoning. So Bacillus cereus is an aerobic spore bearing motile gram positive rod. So this is usually found in soil, in raw and dried and processed foods. The spores can survive cooking, and they can germinate and multiply rapidly when the food is held at those favorable temperatures. Okay, so these days another important point about Bacillus cereus is that the cases of food poisoning has increased in numbers in these recent years. And there are two different types. The Bacillus cereus produces two distinct type of enterotoxins. One is the emetic form and the other is the diarrheal form. The emetic form, it has a very short incubation period of 1 to 6 hours compared to the diarrheal form, which has a longer incubation period of 12 to 24 hours. And the emetic form, which will usually produce symptoms of the upper gastrointestinal tract, like the staphylococcal food poisoning. And the diarrheal form will produce symptoms of the lower intestinal tract, which are very similar to the Clostridium perfringens, like diarrhea, abdominal pain, nausea, with very less vomiting and fever. The recovery is within 24 hours, and the toxins which are produced here are the preformed toxins which are stable. Diagnosis is isolating this Bacillus cereus organism of more than 10 raised to 5 uh, in per gram of these foods, the food which is got. And the treatment here is usually symptomatic treatment. Differential diagnosis of various uh, of food poisoning. Then we have acute gastroenteritis. So most of these, they do present similarly. So how can we differentiate? We'll mainly see how what are the differentiating points between cholera and food poisoning. So coming to the epidemiology, here we can see in food poisoning, there's usually a single group of persons who share a common meal, and usually there are no secondary cases. In case of cholera outbreak, we can see epidemics which are associated with few other cases in the neighborhood. There are secondary cases which will occur. Incubation period in cholera, it is few hours to 5 days, and in food poisoning it is 1 to 24 hours. And onset in food poisoning, usually it begins with vomiting, and in cholera it is usually diarrhea. Then about the other symptoms like nausea and retching, which will be present in food poisoning. And vomiting is usually single severe vomit, mucus and blood streak will be in food poisoning. But in case of cholera, it will be projectile, effortless, watery and continuous vomiting. Stools, again in food poisoning, they are frequent but may contain mucus and blood. And In cholera, it is this rice water uh, stool which is there, okay, and it is inoffensive, whereas it is offensive in food poisoning. Tenesmus will be present in food poisoning, abdominal tenderness will be present in food poisoning, and then dehydration will be less compared to cholera. In cholera, it will be very severe. Muscular cramps will be constant and severe in cholera. And the other important points are the temperature will uh, be usually subnormal in cholera. Then headache are often seen in food poisoning, and then urine will be suppressed in cholera because these symptoms like muscular cramps and reduced urine output, they all related to the uh, severe diarrhea which is there, and then that leading to dehydration. And blood will be normal in food poisoning, and leukocytosis can be seen in cholera. Prevention. Now, how can you prevent food poisoning is the most important thing is by having a good personal hygiene, a proper food storage, keeping the kitchen clean, check for the expiry dates and the labels on the food. Then if we are eating meat, we have to check if it's properly cooked and proper temperatures are maintained when it's stored, and proper pest control. Prevention and control. Under prevention and control, we have two important points, that is food sanitation and refrigeration. Under food sanitation, we have meat inspection, personal hygiene, healthy food handlers, and food handling techniques, sanitary improvements, and health education. Now, in meat inspection, we need to check the animal, or you need to see that the animal is free from infection, and we need to check the animal before and after slaughtering. So then we have personal hygiene, where personal hygiene has to be maintained. Healthy food handlers is all these handlers, the food handlers have to be checked for symptoms of any skin infections, that is wounds and boils. Then if they have any symptoms like diarrhea, dysentery, and any throat infections, so we can ask them not to handle food. Um, Here in this case, we can get the symptomatic people. So the carriers cannot be identified. Then food handling techniques, there are few important points that ready to eat food should be there has to be minimum handling of this food with bare hand, and the preparation and consumption time should be reduced. Then proper cooling, that is rapid cooling and cold storage should be advised. Then uh, another important thing is milk products and egg products has to be pasteurized. And then proper cooking of food has to be done. That is, whenever you cook food, they should not, it has to be heated well. There should be no cool spots in between. That is, the heat has to penetrate up to the center. And most of these food poisoning organisms, they are killed at temperatures over 60 degrees Celsius. Sanitary improvement, uh, that most of the work surfaces, the utensils, equipments, all those have to be clean. Health education, we need to give proper health education about hygiene to these to these food handlers. And then refrigeration, proper temperature is necessary to prevent bacterial food poisoning. Okay, so mainly it is by reducing the bacterial multiplication, and then the toxin production. Surveillance. Food samples must be obtained periodically, and they have to be subjected to lab analysis if to check if they are unsatisfactory. And surveillance is necessary to avoid outbreaks of foodborne infections. Now, diagnosis, usually by a proper history, lab diagnosis by stool culture and microscopic examinations can be done for uh, leukocytes and erythrocytes. Then how do you treat a case of food poisoning is usually it is to give fluids if there is dehydration. Okay, most of the time it is there, so we need to treat dehydration through these IV fluids and giving lot of fluids orally also. And another important thing is do not eat solid food while vomiting is there, and see that they are having plenty of fluids. Then medications, that is anti uh, like for vomiting we can give antiemetics, and then if needed antibiotics also can be given in few cases. So again, if the bacterial cause and all that is known properly, so accordingly we can give antibiotics. Investigation of a case of food poisoning. So there are four important steps, that is verifying the diagnosis and deciding which meal to investigate, then getting the food history of the suspected meal, consolidating the food histories and the sickness history, then extensive assessment of the sanitary history and food hygiene of each constituent of the suspected food item. So let's see these one by one. Verifying the diagnosis and deciding which meal to investigate. So now what could be done is a proper history has to be taken. We need to check for all the symptoms what are given, and then we can based on the symptoms. Now we have a table here showing the most common causes of food poisoning, the etiological agents, their median incubation period in hours, and then we have their symptoms. So based on all this and based on the symptoms which are being given in this particular outbreak, so that could be listed, and then we can come down on one particular organism. And the next important point is plotting of this epidemic curve. Okay, so this could be plotted by having the number of cases on vertical axis, and time which is taken in hours could be plotted on the horizontal axis. And by seeing this curve, by going back in time from the peak of this curve, we can get the median incubation period, okay, of the suspected agent that we have got. And then we can even calculate the minimum and maximum incubation period from the first and the last cases. And the meal that was consumed, where all these uh, three time periods will converge, that could be got. Okay, so now here we are trying to decide on the meal. Okay, so which meal we need to investigate. So by doing this curve and then seeing where all these three time periods are going to converge, we can conclude to. And we can see here we can go back, like whichever organism we have identified, then we can go back in time, okay, from the peak of this epidemic curve. Okay, from that we can go back uh, according to the incubation period of that particular infectious agent, okay, the etiological agent, and then we can decide on the uh, meal which we need to investigate. Getting the food history of the suspected meal. So what we need to do is whichever meal we have come down to, then take a proper food history. So we can prepare a table that is line list the number of cases who have had that meal, then whether they developed symptoms, so what all were the symptoms that they developed, and then the various food items that was served in that meal has to be taken. So we can take all the food items. We need to even include water that was served there. So all this needs to be taken. Next is consolidating the food histories and the sickness history. Now we have both the sickness history first, what we have taken, and then we have taken the food history. Then we need to prepare a summary table for it. So what we are going to do is we are going to just prepare a table like this, and here we have all the food items that were present at that particular meal, and then we are going to list people who have had food and then those who have not had food. So for those who have had the food, how many have become sick? And then after this, we can calculate the incidence among those who ate the food. And similarly, for those who have not had food, how many have become sick and how many have not. And then we can prepare the incidence among those who did not eat that item, okay, that particular food item. And then we can calculate the relative risk and the attributable risk. So once we calculate these with the help of attributable risk, so for which food item it is more, um, so we can come down to that particular food item. Next is the extensive assessment of the sanitary history and food hygiene of each constituent of the suspected food item. So now we have come down to the food item. So next, what we need to see, what were the constituent items in that, and then we need to have a proper history regarding this constituent of that food item. And by taking a proper history, we can know that what exactly happened and why this outbreak of food poisoning happened. So for this, we need to ask these various questions, like from where they were got, okay, and what was the hygienic condition from where that particular food the constituent of that food item was got. Then how were that uh, how was it stored in that cook house? What were the sanitary conditions at the time of cooking? Then what temperature did the initial cooking achieve? What like, was the cooked food eaten hot and freshly cooked, or was it stored? Then if the cooked food was stored, at what temperature and under what hygienic conditions was it stored? If the cooked food was stored, was it adequately heated again before consumption? Okay, so based on all these points, we will know uh, about the constituent food. To summarize the topic, so first we have seen what was the definition of food poisoning. Then after the definition, we have seen the different types of food poisoning, that is the bacterial and the non-bacterial, and we have seen certain examples, that is the salmonella food poisoning, staphylococcal food poisoning, and then we have seen the clostridium perfringens, botulism, and bacillus cereus. And in all this, we have seen the epidemiological factors like the agent factor, source, incubation period, and mechanism of food poisoning. So here we have seen how the symptoms vary, the incubation period in each one of them. Then the most important point is the prevention and control of food poisoning. And then we have seen how we can how we can do the investigation of food poisoning. Okay, so with all these points, then again the most important point is the surveillance. Thank you.